I'm Ron York, and welcome to this discussion of the finances of the city of Norman, Oklahoma. I am also a resident of this city. Last night, the audited financial statements for the year ending June 30th, 2010 were received and approved by the City Council, and they were posted on the internet. Subsequently, I have downloaded that financial statement and have analyzed it along with previous statements that I've analyzed. If you've been following the situation involving the finances of the city of Norman, what you're about to hear from me is going to be almost unbelievable because it will go against virtually everything that you've heard. But every point that I'm going to bring up is totally documented and annotated to the audit report that was just released. Now, if you want a copy of my working papers, which shows more data than what I'm going to show here on this presentation, you can go to www.policepay.net. Now, if you're concerned how that's spelled, it's right on the screen right now. Look right down there at the bottom. It says prepared by, and there it is spelled out. Just put the www dot in front of the police pay net and you've got it. When you go there, just click on the link that says Norman, Oklahoma. It'll take you to a page that will allow you to download a copy of this in a PDF format. It also will have a link to the audited report that came out last night. Now, the correct name for the audit is called the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and most people just refer to it as the audit. The reason that we use the audit versus the budget, which is the document that's usually talked about, is because the audit is the historical record that's been examined by an independent accounting firm. It's the historical record. It's what really occurred. It's prepared after the end of the year. A budget is an estimate prepared before the year begins. Now, many of you have heard the term budget deficit. A budget deficit means that the estimated expenditures are greater than the estimated revenue. Doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. Doesn't mean that's what did happen. But it just means that's what the estimate at the current time is. The numbers we're going to be talking about are the historical record. This is what actually occurred, not what somebody thought might occur. Due to the limitations of YouTube, where we only have 15 minutes, we're going to break this down into three parts. So this first part, we're going to be talking about what's called governmental funds. The second part, we're going to talk about sales tax and the current year's budget. And but we're going to wait until we get the next month's sales tax revenue in, which will be about the 7th or 8th of January 2011. Let me explain to you what the difference between governmental funds and business funds are. Governmental funds are everything the city has except for the 3 utilities in the Westwood golf course, or park as they call it. Those 4 entities are ran as a business. In other words, they're self-sustaining. They charge fees for their services, and those fees go to run the operation. Everything else in the city does not have a way of supporting itself other than partially, and is supported almost entirely by taxes. So we're going to be talking about the governmental portion that today, anyway, that is supported by taxes. Now, the city of Norman has 12 governmental funds, and last year those 12 funds had revenue in excess of $94 million. They operated at a net loss of $4,781,474. Now, that probably sounds just like what you've been hearing, but there's a reason that they're operating that way. These governmental funds are accounted for on what we call the cash basis. When a transactions occurs when actually money exchanges hands. And the reason that there is there is a loss in the governmental funds is because the Capital Projects Fund uh, sold some bonds the previous year and had not spent all the money, and they spent it in this year. So the Capital Projects Fund, which we'll see here in a minute, had a loss of about $7 million. Actually, if we looked at it on an accrual basis, which we can on page 6 of the audit, it shows that when we take that out, that actually the governmental funds had a profit of about $4.8 million. At the end of the year, which is June 30th, 2010, the 12 governmental funds had a total of $50 million in cash and investments. Now, investments in a city are not stocks and bonds and real estate. It's very liquid assets, so we count them all as cash. But they had $50 million. The 4 business funds we talked about, which the golf course and the 3 utilities, water, sewer, and sanitation, had revenue of $37 million. They had a net profit of about $12 million, and they had about $61 million in the bank at the end of the year. Now, all 16 funds combined had total revenues of $132 million, with a net profit of $7 million, and they had $112 million in the bank at the end of the year. Now, the number one fund in this governmental fund grouping is the general fund, and if we look at the general fund, it had about $70 million in revenue under what we call the GAAP method, and I won't even bother to explain that. It had a profit of about $1.2 million, ended up with about $16 million in the bank at the end of the year. The general fund under the budgetary method had slightly less in revenue, but had about the same profit and about the same cash balance. Now, what we really want to look at, though, is the trend of where these revenues and expenditures have gone. And if we look at the next slide, this shows us the governmental revenue over the last 10 years for fiscal year ending 2001 through fiscal year ending 2010. And as you can see, the revenue has grown at a rate of 6.44%, going from slightly more than $50 million to slightly more than $90 million over this 10-year period. Now, if you look at that, I beg anybody to show me where that there's a decline. There isn't. In fact, except for 2003, every year is greater than the year before. That begs the question of if we have a shortfall in revenue, just where is that shortfall in revenue? I think it's been greatly exaggerated, and all the discussion has been around the budget document, not around the historical facts. The historical facts, which can be found on page 95 of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which we refer to as CAFR, which is pronounced phonetically CAFR. So from now on, I will say CAFR rather than say the whole mouthful of the statement. But page 95 of the CAFR shows you this information. Go over and look at it for yourself. You don't have to trust me. You just go over and take a look yourself. Let's look at the tax revenue. A lot of talk about taxes being down. Total taxes, which are part of the last slide, have grown at 6.64%. And again, I beg anybody to show me where there's a decline. Again, this is coming from page 95 of the CAFR. Now, I'm sure there's going to be somebody out there that's going to try to impeach their own statements, but so be it. But that's just the documented facts. It's not my numbers, it's the city's numbers. Let's look at the next chart that shows governmental revenues over the last 10 years, same period. They've grown at a 6.88% rate. Again, there have been no real cuts. It's been up, up, up. Let's see where they spend their money on the next slide over here. We look at this and it shows that the revenue that comes into the city in governmental revenues, 73% of it comes in the form of taxes. Most of that is sales tax and use tax. 13% comes from services, those fees they charge, building permits, so forth. 9% comes from grants from the federal and state government, and then 5% are other things. Next slide we look at shows the expenditures, how they spending that money. 38% of governmental expenditures are going to police and fire. 19% is going to streets. I have grouped some of these together. 5% to parks. City Hall is getting 18%. Actually, the City Hall operation is probably closer to 15% because the city of Norman doesn't use what we call internal service funds. So some of the stuff that would not be in there are in there. So there's about 3% of that 18% is probably not accountable to City Hall, but it's more like a shared services such as the building maintenance. Bond payments represent 4% of the revenues. In other words, the debt, principal and interest. Let's look at the next one here. This shows the net profit and loss. I know if you're an accountant that knows governmental accounting, you're probably throwing up on these terms, but I'm trying to do all this in the vernacular where those that don't understand governmental accounting can have some clue of what's going on. Now, if you notice, we have 3 years there showing rather huge profits. Now, trust me, those did not exist. There's not really that kind of profit. What happened in those 3 years, the city issued bonds but did not spend all the money within that year. So as a result, you have one that goes way up, then you fall back down, then they issued debt. That's exactly what happened to the last year that we're in right now, 2010. They sold, I think, seemed like about $15 million in bonds. They didn't spend all the money, and then they spent it subsequently in this next year. And that's one of the disadvantages of cash accounting. Now, one of the things to keep in mind when we look at this, this is not what's been reported in the newspaper here in Norman. I mean, it's a totally different story. You think that the Great Depression had returned, but when it's all tallied up and put together, it appears that on an aggregate basis for the governmental funds, Norman never really took much of a hit from this last recession because it continued to grow. Again, I want to point out, these are not my numbers. I did not manipulate them. They're on the city's document, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the year ending June 30th, 2010, page 95. They're not an opinion. They're not somebody's thoughts. They are the documented record. One of the things that's really surprising is when we look at the general fund, as late as just 2 months ago, the city was projecting that the ending fund balance would be a number that we now know is about $2 million less than what they'd anticipated at that time. So I think that's rather significant to keep in mind that everything you hear is not necessarily so. But we're going to look at some other stuff. We're going to look at the utilities in a different presentation because we're running out of time. We're up on a 13.5-minute point right now, and we'll soon be over the limit. And then we're going to look at that. The utilities do need some help. They do need the rates increased. It does appear that they're making money, but the only reason they're making money is because we don't really have, in my opinion, true adequate depreciation, and then there's the fact that the utilities are having to expand for population growth and building. In the following segment, the one that's going to come next, we're going to talk about sales tax. And I can tell you that sales tax is up. It's been up for about 8 months now. There's no reason to think that it won't continue to go up. Sales tax in Oklahoma City is booming really at a very brisk rate. But go over there and download download the exhibits. Take a look at them yourself. Download the audit. Look at it too. Everything we have in these exhibits, we have them annotated to the page where you can find that number. So you don't have to take our word for it. You can just read it for yourself. But the bottom line is, the city of Norman is not in financial trouble. It is doing very well.